Hey there, folks. I'm Mark, in affiliation with Spectrum Pulse, and we had a lot of country this week, and a complicated conversation. And it's Billboard BREAKDOwn. I don't remember. So here's an observation about the Hot 100 right now. It's always been kind of true that you need a lot of concentrated promo to get into the upper echelons of the chart, but observing this weird, clunky stasis near the very top, compared to the wild flurry in the bottom half, kinda starts saying that radio entrenchment is a much stronger factor in what actually gets a lot of momentum to break through. Yes, I know, pure streaming or sales can overwhelm a lot, we've seen it before, but breaking into that higher tier with any sort of timeliness feels considerably tougher, and given how slow, outdated, and consolidated terrestrial radio can be, I'm noticing a pattern with otherwise busy weeks just replacing each other rather than driving that deeper penetration to the very top. Well outside of the biggest stars. Want proof of that? Okay, our top 10, where for another week, Flowers by Miley Cyrus holds at number 1, and nothing's really close to challenging it right now. Dominant on sales and streaming, the radio is surging. The margin is only widening between it and Kill Bill by SZA at number 2, which got the streams but just can't chase down Miley on the sales of the radio. And I really don't think that Creepin' by Metro Boomin, 21 Savage, and The Weeknd up to number 3 is going to challenge either. It's got that radio lead, for now, but it lags on streaming and on sales. Now this places Anti-Hero by Taylor Swift firmly on the downswing. Streaming seems stable, but the radio and sales are dropping sharply to put it at number 4. Then we got Unholy by Sam Smith and Kim Petras at number 5. The sales are good, it picked up streams this week, and while radio is on the downturn, it was actually mostly holding position, better than I personally expected. Compare it to Die For You by The Weeknd rising up to number 6. Radio growth is slowing down, but is still otherwise robust, and it did see some marginal improvements on streaming. Now compare that to I'm Good Blue by David Guetta and BB Rexa down at number 7, because while it rules the radio, it's losing pretty much everywhere else. It's very much on the downswing. Then holding pat, we got Rich Flex by Drake and 21 Savage at number 8. Streaming is just locked in and radio's basically inert, and As It Was by Harry Styles at number 9, which is definitely losing radio, but at such a slow pace, it's not really getting threatened. And that opens the door for just one new arrival. I Just Wanna Rock by Lil Uzi Vert. I gotta say, I'm kinda stunned it got up to number 10, but the streaming is on the upswing, and more importantly, radio is really on board with it. It's really the only way you can get penetration this high, and it has been a long, slow climb for that song. But again, that's my point. This top 10 feels shockingly locked in place outside of a major celebrity breakthrough, with only the modest of shifts. Now compare this to our losers and dropouts, where in the latter category, it is the long-running cuts like Vegas by Doja Cat finally exiting, or losers that I've been talking about for weeks that never quite got the momentum to take off, like Half of Me by Thomas Rhett and Riley Green, or Star Walkin' by Lil Nas X. And it's not like we're seeing a lot of big losers in the top half of the charts here either. The biggest drop here is off the debut for Nightcrawler by Trippie Redd in the late Juice WRLD, falling hard to 93, but again, the rest aren't that surprising. I called the big loss for Nonsense by Sabrina Carpenter down to 72, as Billboard, Spotify, and the major labels figure out their own chicanery. SZA's seeing a few lingering album bomb dips for Blind to 68 and Love Language to 78. Similar case for Metro Boomin with Too Many Nights with Don Toliver and Future down to 84. And hell, I called Gato de Noche by Nengo Flow and Bad Bunny the week it came out that it would bomb, as it slid down to 97. The only one disappointing one here is Heart to Heart by Mac DeMarco, losing all the gains down to 98. But let's also be disappointingly real. Virality for this one in the indie set doesn't quite last, gotta say it. But it's not the losers that really deserve scrutiny here, it is the gains. Not so much the returns. Tennessee Fan by Morgan Wallen's back at 92 for some reason, likely due to some other Morgan Wallen related activity we will have to examine later. And hell, when you take a look at our gains, he's got One Thing at a Time rising up to 53. Then off the debut, we have AMG by Gabito Ballesteros, Peso Pluma, and Nathaniel Keno at at 79. Again, kind of a crapshoot how much any of these regional Mexican hits will pick up. And Do It Again by NLE Choppa and Too Rare up to 85. Which, if you are looking for a pop crossover, I would say this song could have a shot if it got radio. But the songs making more tangible gains into the top 50 are because the radio got on board, with Lavender Haze by Taylor Swift looking like her next big push at 19. Would not have been my personal choice, but whatever. But what's really notable here, Players by Coi Leray at 38. I'm frankly a little bit shocked how well it's selling, but let's be real. The only reason this is lasting on the Hot 100 at all, it's radio crossover presence. It's chasing pop rap sampling cliches, of which I'm lukewarm on at best. And I like Coi Leray more than most, but this is not the way I wanted to see her get groundswell or chart traction. That's all I'm saying. But again, we have a pretty stacked list of new arrivals here, mostly in the bottom 50, and they're not really getting that deeper penetration, with only one limited glaring exception. But let's start off with number 100, Dancin' in the Country by Tyler Hubbard.
Never wanna go home and never wanna not be dancing in the country. Dancing in the country.
So I had a patron put the Tyler Hubbard album on my schedule. I listened to it, and sadly there's nothing to really say about it here. I've heard Florida Georgia Line albums. This is not some grand creative pivot beyond a formula that is pretty tired, and it's just running on Tyler Hubbard's charisma. And while I personally like 5'9" a lot, this is the other side of the album where I'm less forgiving. A loose two-step dance song where it is nice that Hubbard and his producers finally discovered what a bass line is, but it still feels pretty damn flimsy, especially with all the over-processed vocals and the lyrics that feel recycled from a dozen other Florida Georgia Line songs. Now, I do like that Tyler Hubbard sounds like he's having fun, but I wish that the production or the content felt a little bit more warm or distinct. As it is, I'm not about to complain about it, but I'm gonna forget this song in record time. Just saying. Number 99, Never Gonna Not Dance Again by Pink.
Dance again. Oh, I just wanna pop and look to my records. They go on my clothes. Never gonna not dance again.
Maybe the problem is that I still care. Pink's been incredibly hit or miss since she left a lot of the rock behind in the early 2010s. That was over 10 years ago. But she came back with Irrelevant last year, and even if the radio wasn't going to touch it, that was one of my favorite songs of 2022. So maybe it set up expectations for that upcoming album that weren't really realistic. Especially as this came out a couple months later, and it's only charting now because radio is dragging it up the Hot 100. And look, if I were to separate from what I wish Pink was making, this is not a bad song. Max Martin and Shellback are good producers and songwriters. This sort of light disco, it's not difficult to pull together for a breezy dance song with a nice bass line and some weedy horns, and Pink has always been a great performer, even if this does feel out of her wheelhouse and she's not quite loose enough to pull it off. But what it reminds me of the most is Can't Stop the Feeling by Justin Timberlake from back in 2016. The sort of generally tolerable radio fodder where the disposability only highlights what the main artist used to do so well. And say what you will, at least Justin Timberlake could handle the groove better. And I'll say it, the phrase never gonna not dance again, it sounds painfully awkward with the double negative here. Even in her prime, Pink could get kind of awkward with some of her lyrical phrasing, and for a song that is all about the vibes and the rhythm and groove, it only highlights just how much of this does not work. It's nowhere close to the worst thing that Pink has ever made, but it might be the most depressing. It's not good going into your album called Trustfall that I feel this distrustful of whatever we're gonna get. Number 96, Hey More by Ozuna featuring Feid. What's important to note with this single is not Ozuna. I've said my piece about how I'm no fan of this guy, but his guest star Feid, a Colombian singer-songwriter, has been racking up the global hits, but this is his first breakthrough stateside. And Okay, look, Feid's slightly more textured and melodic tone. It might be the best thing about this song altogether, beyond the very stock reggaeton percussion, the smothered melody, and Ozuna's very nasal croon. And even then, you can tell that everyone is underplaying on the song. And for a track regretful that relationships ended and the girl was still in their heads, I think Feid seems to get the ambiance pretty well, and which is not helped by Ozuna's verse, which is considerably hornier and more crass. In other words, I guess I'm pleased with Feid finally breaking through. I'm not going back to this. Number 86, Fin de Semana by Junior H and Oscar Maydon.
El dinero que yo traigo, mija, es pa' gastarlo. No como los gatos que te siguen ahí rogando.
Hey look, we're still not done with the regional Mexican songs, this time by two acts that appear to have massive followings in Mexico, but haven't really broken out of it. And surprise, I'm not fond of this either. In fact, this might be considerably worse than most of them, with the same sort of slapdash live production, but now paired with stiff and staccato accordion warbles, even more brittle acoustics, and a lot of tumbling percussion that sounds so slapdash that any consistent rhythm just goes out the window. It almost sounds amateurish in the really bad way, where they forgot to write a proper hook for the song and they can't really play together with each other. And while neither singer has much of a personality, the writing really isn't doing them any favors here either, where they seem to have a lot of plans for how this hookup is going to proceed with this girl, and they will not take any of your excuses, and they certainly won't beg for anything. Honestly, frankly, it's just completely unlikable, and I'm thoroughly sick of this trend. I understand that something might be getting lost in translation, some cultural distance, but I've also heard enough of these songs to recognize the truly bad stuff, and this is it. Next. Number 80, The Black Seminole by Lil Yachty.
Sex symbol, the black seminole. A sex symbol, the black seminole.
It's hard to escape the feeling that this song is emblematic of Lil Yachty's psychedelic experiment as a whole. There's a lot of cool textures, an absolute throwback to classic rock, specifically Pink Floyd, where on a textural level, it sounds impressive as hell, as the synth will bubble and spill into a bassy, organ-touched swell, complete with a sizzling guitar solo after Lil Yachty's second verse, and then the tempos will shift, and the transitions are executed impeccably, and the song will just jam into this ethereal outro with crashing drums and Diana Gordon singing over the expanse. It is a really novel experience. But once you get past that and dig a little bit deeper, and even if you like Lil Yachty's auto-tuned voice over this like I actually do, the song starts feeling kind of flabby, and you wish there was a little bit more meat to it. Hell, there's traces of some cool ideas. I think the juxtaposition of the Black Seminole with African Rambo and the verses of spaced out alienation creates this feeling of being out of one's expected place but getting newfound power, the general with newfound responsibilities. But Yachty's last verses and taking the most politically charged imagery he has ever had is, love is not a lie, it just feels like a Tarantino movie scene. It just feels kind of hollow as a result. Don't get me wrong, I think it's impressive what he did here, but I don't know how strong the resonance is outside of the style. I'm still happy it got through to the Hot 100, check it out, but just be cautious in your expectations. Number 71, I'm Not Here to Make Friends by Sam Smith.
I'm not here to make friends, yeah, 'cause I'm not here to make friends. I need a lover, I need a lover.
I really don't want to wade into the discourse about Sam Smith in this video. It just feels kind of gross what image that certain subsets of stans that should know better will then demand out of their pop icons. And it really goes to show how just when Sam Smith showcases a more flamboyant side of themselves, divorced from the traditional beauty standards, how quickly so much of that audience abandons any progressive principles of acceptance and then turns on them. Lip service to standards that they only decide to use to punch down, forget actually holding themselves to it. And you know what? That's all around a song that's otherwise so very underwhelming to me. Calvin Harris co-produces, and his brand of very light disco doesn't really add much to this, nor do Jesse Reyes' ad-libs on the hook. But you know what? It's more because Sam Smith is delivering a lot more intensity than this production can really match or flatter, and the whole shout-along hook is not a lane that fits them all that well. I mean, for this sort of sharp, vamping hookup song, you need much sharper percussion, a tighter bass line, maybe a faster tempo. Okay, basically I want Disclosure to remix this song post-haste. As it is, okay, generally fine, but there was better on Gloria. I'll wait until the next single comes out. Let's hope it's not Gimme. Number 64, Growin' Up and Gettin' Old by Luke Combs.
In the middle of growing up and getting old.
Look, I really like Luke Combs. He's hit a pretty decent stride the past couple of years, and I think he's making a mistake by pushing the sister album to Growin' Up from last year this early. You can tell it was clearly his plan, but given the runway required for country singles to work and how it can take months for them to chart properly, and how he's still not pushed Outrunning Your Memory with Miranda Lambert, that's a single, he could make it work, but it runs the very real risk of oversaturation, and that's been a problem with Luke Combs before. But hey, new single, starting off this run, and yeah, it's good, but I don't think it's all that special. Luke Combs is getting a little bit older. He's trying to show a bit more judgment before partying so hard, becoming more settled in his life, but still wanting to tell everyone he can still cut loose, guys. I think my issue with the song comes more in the production or maybe the composition here. The bridge feels a little too short, the meatier guitars could use some more vibrancy or texture, the groove could actually exist or have some crunch. It winds up feeling like an album cut that, again, it's not that interesting, it doesn't really stand out. Again, I think it's fine, but Luke Combs has definitely done better. Number 61, Everything I Love by Morgan Wallen.
You leave us in a cloud of dust. Can't you see what you're doing, girl? You ruin damn near everything I love.
So remember that exception I mentioned surrounding songs that get penetration to the higher reaches of the Hot 100? The larger truth is that these days it's increasingly reserved for the superstars, and for Morgan Wallen, who, without even the full benefit of a full tracking week, dropped another 3 songs for his upcoming 36-song album. Forewarning in advance, it's gonna get an album bomb, even despite the string of songs that the past couple of years he's been drip feeding. God help us all. So let's start off with is thankfully not an Alan Jackson cover. What it actually is a loose interpolation of an Allman Brothers song, so a Morgan Wallen cut that's got more legit twang and old school country rollick than frankly the majority of his catalog, although smothered in a distressing amount of watery guitar murk. And yeah, it runs into the same issue as You Proof for being so damn chipper post-breakup, talking about how this girl ruined everything that he loves, from fishing to booze to even his hometown. I mean, I get the impression it's supposed to play a little bit more loose and light, it's more of a joke, but Morgan Wallen doesn't really have the expressive range in his nasal delivery to pull off this sort of comedy. At least there's no trap elements this time. So, I don't know, let's move on to number 58, I Wrote the Book by Morgan Wallen.
Enough to keep me on a straight line. I'm a jack of all trades, but man, I gotta say, that's one book I didn't write.
Can somebody tell Joey Moy and the rest of Morgan Wallen's producers to stop smothering the guitars and watery effects? It was tired and old 2 years ago. I'm really getting sick of it. But now we get the brittle, programmed skitters of trap percussion. I guess when you get Hardy to co-write, that comes with the territory. And then the general conceit, where Morgan Wallen lists off all the cliches of the hard-nosed tough guy that he is, that he wrote the book on him, but when it comes to living by the Bible, well, that's a book he did not write. It cost him his relationship. What feels kind of weird about this hook is that despite the begrudging acknowledgement that Morgan Wallen probably should indeed read the Bible at some point, he might learn something, the hook ends on the sentiment that it is something he did not write, in comparison with all the stuff that he did apparently write. It's a weird parallel to land on your chorus. I don't know, I don't think this is terrible, but it's not remotely good, and it doesn't impress me either. Next, number 42, Dawns by Zach Bryan featuring Maggie Rogers.
lost the last July in a heart attack. I need one small victory.
This caught me off guard. I knew Zach Bryan had been building a lot of buzz the past year or so, and Maggie Rogers, while having a bumpy couple of years, she did get some critical acclaim for her sophomore album Surrender last year. Why not team up? But what I think surprises me is that it debuted this high, especially because as a song, it's kinda tough to quantify. For one, Zach Bryan's production shows a lot of the rough edges here, in the vocal mixing and the very ragged arrangement, and his delivery sounds more fried out than normal. He and Maggie Rogers definitely have some chemistry, but it feels slapdash, which is also how I would describe a song with very little groove and kinda has a wonky relationship with tempo, and a lot of the vocal harmonies are rough around the edges too. And yet somehow, it actually works. It describes a relationship that's very much in its last moments, where especially in the wake of Zach Bryan's mother passing away, Maggie Rogers' lack of faith forces Bryan to grapple with grief in an ugly way. And then we actually get her side of the story, where she sings solo, and she does have faith, but it's more complicated. And she wants to spend more of her life happy outside of what seems like a really toxic relationship with an uncertain future ahead. It's the sort of relationship drama that feels very adult, very raw, where nobody's precisely in the wrong here, and nobody looks all that great in the framing. And the messy disintegrations backed up by these climactic strings sliding in against the rougher guitars that sells how huge that dramatic scene can be. I don't know, if anything, I'm more impressed by the audacity of pushing a song this long and ambitious in its concept this high. I have no idea if it's gonna last, but damn, I respect them for pulling it off. This is really impressive. Number 40, Love Again by Kid LAROI.
Is this time the end? Tell me how many more tears will drop till you hit me with can we talk and try love again?
Maybe it's just me. I thought Kid LAROI would have way more traction coming out of last year to fully kick his career into motion. I remember how quickly it worked for Juice WRLD, but hey, he's got the lead-off single for that debut album proper. And look, there's actually parts of this I don't mind. How the acoustics rise out of the reverbed guitars. There's a pretty decent hook here. The messy back and forth of the relationship drama, it feels more tangible. But Kid LAROI is delivering the most basic version of it for just over 2 minutes, and it feels very hollow, especially given that you could tell that likely one of his label bosses saw the success of Without You and thought, you know what, they should hone in on that formula going forward. Now it doesn't feel as clueless as Without You was, but that just makes it feel really damn generic and forgettable. So yeah, not really to talk about. I'd skip it. And finally, number 27, Last Night by Morgan Wallen.
Everything we said, but we said it all. You told me that you wish I was somebody you never met. But baby, something's telling me this ain't over yet.
Alright, last of the Morgan Wallen songs. This is projected to jump into the top 10 next week. Y'all have been warned. And I actually get why. Because, well, you can tell it was very much built for TikTok with that runtime. I also can't deny there's a really solid melodic hook here. Yeah, the snap beat's a throwback to something that was in country I thought we left behind in 2019. And Morgan Wallen's vocals sound really overprocessed. The entire song could have played it more acoustic, like more of a Torch song. It probably would have turned out better. And Morgan Wallen playing the other side of a will they, won't they, bad relationship song with a weirdly presumptive angle from him. It does not flatter his strengths as a performer. But again, I get that feeling that there's a hook here that's really gonna work. Ultimately, not the worst thing ever. Again. But my big concern with this avalanche of Morgan Wallen songs being shoveled out is the exact same I had with Dangerous the double album. Disposable quantity over quality. And nothing seems to be changing. It worked last time. So if you can't tell, I'm not looking forward to this album. It's likely not going to be that fun. But you know what? For Best of the Worst of the Week, Morgan Wallen's getting the dishonorable mention for I Wrote the Book, mostly because the worst is going to Fin de Semana by Junior H and Oscar Maydon. What a mess of a song. And for the record, Pink's song this week was a runner-up because, man, that just made me sad. Now, Best of the Week, Yeah, Dawns by Zach Bryan and Maggie Rogers, that's the obvious one, but it's also well-deserved, and The Black Seminole by Lil Yachty is getting the honorable mention. I mean, I'm not really that surprised now, but go back before this January, I think just seeing Lil Yachty getting this might blow some folks' minds. Anyway, next week might be a bit of a breather. I certainly hope that it will be, given that I'm going to be on vacation overseas. I am praying for a light week. Stay tuned. Until then, I'm Mark. You're watching Billboard Breakdown, affiliated with Spectrum Pulse. And I'll see you next time.